morning. We're finally ready to go, though. All right. So, welcome. You've just finished homework number 8. That assignment you submitted before 11 o'clock. And the next one, number 9, we're moving on to a new phase in the course where we talk about things other than profit. So, homework 9 is having to do with this kind of change of gears that we're going to begin today. And that assignment should be submitted by 11 a.m. on next Monday. And now we're just about a month away from the submission deadline for your class project. And I've got a couple of questions trickling in, but I can kind of tell based on how many students are asking me things whether or not that's being worked on yet. And it seems like for the most part students haven't yet started really thinking about the project in too much detail. So again, I'll renew my suggestion that you're going to have a lot better experience with this if you get started early rather than trying to leave it to the last moment. It's not that it's going to take a lot of time, it's just that if you start and then have some time to mull over and think and check and make corrections, then you'll just end up with a much cleaner result. All right, so any questions on the announcements before we begin today's class on benefit cost analysis? All right. Well, till now, the course has just focused almost exclusively on the idea that money is everything, that our objective should always be to maximize profit and focus on essentially nothing else. You know, when we think about present worth analysis, future worth analysis, annual worth analysis, internal rate of return, external rate of return, incremental internal rate of return, all of those analyses would just look at a company's cash flow. You're looking at what initial investment is required, what will be the returns on that investment, and comparing it to a minimum attractive rate of return, and then you'd get a thumbs up or a thumbs down on a project based on maximizing those profits. But I think everybody here probably already knows that there is more to life than maximizing profit, that both as individuals and also as a society, we have values other than just trying to increase economic gain. And so we're going to talk about some of the tools that we can use to analyze projects in ways other than just maximizing the profits. So before we talk about those tools, think about some activities that illustrate this point, that there is more to life than profit. And so, for instance, disaster relief and providing food aid in places where there's been a famine. There's no profit incentive for activity like that. And yet, people all over the world find ways to help other people when there's a need, whether it's donating food or donating money or volunteering one's time. You know, people help others out even though you're not going to get a rate of return on volunteering at the homeless shelter. You're not going to get a rate of return on sending rice to a famine someplace in the world. So that's one proof, I guess you could say, that it's not all about money. If it was all about money, people wouldn't do stuff like that. And if you think about a guardrail that goes along the side of a highway, now think about what purpose that guardrail serves. The guardrail doesn't make it any faster to commute to work, and it's not improving the speed at which your Amazon delivery is going to get to your house. And of course, putting in a guardrail beside the highway is very costly. If you think about all of that steel and the time it takes to install it, so there's a cost there, but who profits from putting in a guardrail in a direct way? Is someone going to be earning more money in a direct way because of the guardrail? I don't think so. It's an investment in safety. And of course, having improvements in safety will pay indirect benefits to both society and individuals who maybe would have experienced a traffic accident. And without the guardrails, it looks like in this case, the roadway drops off pretty considerably. And so, you know, an accident going off the side of the road there could cause a death. And so now the person who's still alive when they otherwise would have died is going to be more economically productive. But I think a lot of people would pursue an improvement in safety regardless of whether it has an economic impact, just for the sake of preserving human life, even though it's expensive. All right, now, for those of you who are at home following along, any guesses on what we're looking at here, like the purpose of this barrier on the side of the highway?
Sound barrier.
It's a sound barrier. That's right, Zach. You know, you can see some trucks along the side of the highway. Highway noise can be very loud. And when driving on I-77, I'm kind of sensitive to noise like that, but not everybody is. It always kind of amazes me driving on I-77 between Huntington and Charleston, how many homes, including really nice homes, are built right up against the freeway, because that would drive me freaking nuts to have to listen to that road noise constantly. But some people it bothers, some people it doesn't. A purpose like this, the sound barrier, is to get the noise of an adjacent highway away from the community that's on the other side of that barrier. And it's very costly to put up something like this, and the people who are driving on the road don't get any direct economic benefit from limiting that damage or inconvenience to the people who are on the other side of the barrier. And so it's just, the point is that we're willing to spend money even if it doesn't increase profits, that there is some sort of societal value to protecting the quality of life for people. And it's not something, that protection of the quality of life, it's not something we may be able to measure when we're talking about internal rate of return. And so we need some other way, some other tools to analyze whether it's justified to spend, you know, think about this barrier, for example. It looks like the front face of that sound barrier is maybe 11 feet tall. Why not make it 20 feet tall or 30 feet tall? It would probably be a little bit quieter on the other side. And so there has to be some sort of a way to analyze the incremental benefit and the value that comes from slightly different configurations in a noise wall. Pollution is another example of something that we all kind of know, that you don't want a polluted river, but there's profit in pollution. If you can discharge your waste to a stream without having to purify that waste first, you're going to get more profit. And so society is willing to impose restrictions on pollution, whether it's air pollution, soil pollution, erosion of topsoil, pollution of the water. Society is getting increasingly willing to impose limits on the discharge of pollutants, because we all recognize that you know, we're all living on the earth together, and this is the only one we've got for now, and keeping it nice, there's some value in that. Even if an individual company maybe doesn't make as much profit as if they could if they were just dumping the waste into the river. So the point is that it's not always just about the money. So far in the course, we've only focused on the money. Starting today, we're going to focus on other things as well. You know, the COVID-19 pandemic that we're going through right now is a great illustration that people are willing to make economic sacrifices in some cases, and maybe their willingness to make those sacrifices changes the longer that they're being asked to make the sacrifices, but it's not all about the money. Investments in public health are able to limit the spread of a pandemic, and the countries that have had the best response to COVID-19, the fewest deaths, the fewest infections, are the ones that have a robust public health network. And so spending on testing, spending on surveillance and looking for antibodies in people's blood, providing payments to people who are out of work to give them an incentive not to be out when they should be in, all of those things have helped to limit the spread of the pandemic in other places. So public sector projects are those that are financed, used, or owned by the citizens of a government. And so it could be a municipality, like a city. It could be a county government, a state government, or even the federal government. But these public sector projects are things that normally a private company wouldn't bother to invest in. Although there are a handful of exceptions, and we'll talk about why it's generally the public sector that operates a highway, or why it's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, for example, that's charged with maintaining our nation's waterways, and why we don't have a for-profit company that maintains those waterways. and a city park, the beautiful Ritter Park that we have here in the area. That's something that the city provides. It's not private land, it's public land, and people don't pay to use it. But the idea is that in each one of these cases, there's more than just the economic benefit. There's quality of life improvements, there's public safety improvements, there's environmental protection benefits, and so it's worth doing these projects even if the projects are sometimes done at a loss, where it's costing more money to operate them than it is than the revenue that's being generated. So here's another list of projects that for a variety of reasons are usually coordinated at the government level, or sometimes just the project is outright financed and operated by the government. Now, one of the reasons why these projects aren't oftentimes done by private companies is that they have a really long time horizon to pay them off or to get the benefit. If you're going to be putting in, for example, drinking water pipes, it requires a huge upfront investment to get those pipes purchased, installed in the ground, the excavation that has to be done before you put the water pipeline in the ground. It's going to take decades and decades to receive a return on investment, and private companies generally don't have that kind of a long time frame that they're able to wait before they can get the recoup their investment. So all of these kind of have in common that there's a long time frame. That's not the only factor, but it's an important one. The purpose of these projects is to improve the life of the public, and it's either to do it at no profit or to do it where you're just earning enough to pay off the project itself and maybe also support some other minor aspect of the public good. And so in the case of a convention center or a sports arena, the place that's hosting sporting events or hosting conventions may turn a small profit, but then that would be reinvested into the municipal authority that sponsored the project, so that then those funds could go into transportation projects or low-cost housing, or just kind of reinvested into the public good and not returning like a dividend to people necessarily. Now, this is a really important table, and you know that I like to include short answer questions on your exams. And so understanding the information on this table is important for you to be able to answer the short answer questions on your next exam. And speaking of which, if we just look at the future, your next exam is on Friday the 30th of October. So that's going to be here before you know it. That's the end of next week is your next exam, exam 2. Okay, so let's talk through this compare and contrast. Public projects, which we're talking about now, are the sorts of things on this list. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to compare the characteristics of projects like this to the typical project that's undertaken by a for-profit company, a private project. And so a public project, part of the reason why it's done by the public is it requires a huge upfront investment. Putting pipes in the ground or building a big hospital or putting in a road. They're just very capital intensive, and most private companies aren't going to have enough money to undertake a project like that, and they may not have the credit history in order to even borrow enough money for that project. But a government has access to a much larger pool of funds, because a government has what no private company will ever have. A government has the ability to levy taxes. And so they have the legal right to take money from their citizens, and so that gives them a very good creditworthiness. The state of West Virginia, for example, has the authority to issue income taxes. And here in Cabell County, our county government charges people property taxes. The city of Huntington has a city user fee that if you're working in the Huntington city limits, you have to pay the user fee. You can't opt out of that. You can't choose not to be a customer of the city of Huntington. You just have to pay the fee. And because governments have the legal right to charge taxes, they're considered to be very stable by people who loan money to governments. And so governments can borrow money at a really low rate of interest because they have a pretty good source of revenue. They have the tax base that's inside of their boundaries. And so when you've got the legal right to tax an economy, then that's considered a pretty safe investment. So the federal government, the United States government can borrow money more cheaply than essentially any private company around, because they've never defaulted on their loans yet anyway. So that's the first thing, is it takes a lot of money for these big projects, and private companies oftentimes don't have access to that much money. There are exceptions. There are a handful of really large multinational corporations like Exxon that can undertake long-term big investment projects, but those are the exception rather than the rule. The public projects have really long lifespans. You're building something that's going to be in service for a long time, like a dam or a bridge or a roadway. And so because you have a really long time horizon, then that means that you can be looking for benefits long into the future. Whereas private companies, because they have a responsibility to return profits to their shareholders as quickly as possible, they usually focus on projects that can be completed more quickly. Annual cash flow for a public project is that we're not necessarily looking for a profit, but private projects are profit driven, and if a project isn't profitable, most likely it's not going to be undertaken. Private companies have access to raising money in a lot of different ways. They can sell stock, which is a way of becoming a part owner in a private company. You're becoming an equity shareholder if you buy stock. Bonds are like a loan that's sold by a company to investors. A loan is a private agreement between a bank and a company, differing from bonds, because in the case of the bonds are sold by the company, and lots of different individuals can purchase the bonds, but usually a loan arrangement would be between just a single bank that's providing the money to the private company. Whereas public projects have access to some of those same different revenue sources to fund the projects, like the sale of bonds. Municipal and state governments and federal governments sell bonds, but also they can get money for projects by charging user fees and taxes and so on. And public projects, because they have access to lower cost of capital, are going to have discount rates that are lower than private projects. Now remember, discount rates are a way of looking at money in the future. And we all know and have talked about in detail why money in the future is less valuable than money today. It's because in the future, for example, everything is going to be more expensive due to inflation. And so if someone offers you $100 now or $100 in 10 years, it's better to take that $100 now, because it can buy more stuff than it's going to be able to buy in 10 years. When prices are higher, and $100 maybe will only get you the same stuff that you can get for $60 now. So what that means is that the benefits in the future, if you think about a bridge is going to be providing benefit for 100 years. But those benefits way out in the future, a private company is going to be less interested in benefits in the future because they have a higher discount rate than a public project is subject to. Okay, selection criteria. Remember, you choose the alternative in a private project based on the rate of return. You want to maximize your profits and find the highest external rate of return. That's how you choose which option. It's all about the profit. But in public projects, there are other criteria besides economics. There can also be social, environmental, safety, public health, and so there are other factors to consider besides just the economics of it. And finally, that selection criteria ties into the environment of evaluation, where there's a political consideration because you're trying to balance the needs of a diverse group of stakeholders, whether it's the people living in the area or the businesses that may be affected by a particular project. So there is a difference in kind of the factors and the forces that are applying when you decide which project to go with. In the case of a private company, they don't face some of the same social pressures very often that a public project would. Now you'll notice down here at the bottom I add one other note, and that is that we need to be judicious in public projects, that you don't want to undertake a project that isn't going to return genuine value to a society, because the money that goes into a public project has to be taken from someone in order to do the project. And so if you're building a new football stadium so that you can have an NFL team, the money that goes into something like that has to be taken from some other opportunity. So when you spend $500 million on a football stadium someplace, that means that that $500 million had to be taken from the people who provided it, and it's being spent on a stadium and not on schools, or not on improving roads, not on improving hospitals. And so we have to always keep in mind that just public projects aren't spending free money. It's still real money, and it came from people who probably could have spent it in a way that's more meaningful to them than the way that the government is going to spend it. All right, so sitting in traffic. The delay of sitting in traffic has an economic benefit to avoid it. If you reduce the delay, then not only are you going to reduce the fuel that's burned by sitting in traffic, but if you speed up how long it takes somebody to get home from work, then you're giving them that time to spend on something else. So what we can do is, sitting in traffic doesn't actually cost you money. Like if you're driving to Charleston and the freeway's shut down, as it frequently is, unfortunately, like there's been an accident or something and you're just sitting and waiting, nobody is walking up and down and taking money out of your wallet because of that delay. It's just that there's an opportunity cost. It's things that you could have been doing. And so it's possible to assign a dollar value to avoiding sitting in traffic. And the same thing with getting sick. If you can avoid a disease, then it's not like you get more money in your pocket, but it makes you more productive than you'd be if you were sick. And so it's possible through pretty sophisticated and detailed studies to do an analysis of how much is it worth to avoid an illness, or how much is it worth on a dollars per hour basis for reducing traffic delay. How much is it worth to have the enjoyment of fishing? Because what we're going to need to do in these analyses of benefit costs is we're going to have to assign a dollar value to things that aren't necessarily economic. Recreation is something where it's tricky to say how much is it worth to provide someone with an hour of fishing opportunity. I mean, you can think about what they would have paid to be there, but it's different for every person. Some people are really wealthy and maybe they'd pay $100 an hour to be in a beautiful setting and fishing. And other people have very limited funds and maybe they wouldn't be able to spend as much on recreation, but it's still important to them. And so there's this field of economics that tries to quantify the dollar value of benefits and disbenefits. And so a delay, if you think about construction in front of a gas station, it's going to shut them down. If customers don't have access to going into a gas station while the construction is being done, then there are direct disadvantages, like their revenue is going to go down. But then people also are going to get out of the habit of going to that particular store, and maybe they start to go to a different gas station instead. And so when you do a holistic analysis of the effects of a project, where you're trying to analyze the advantages and disadvantages of doing the project, you really have to think in kind of like secondary and tertiary ways of how are people going to be affected by these projects, and then going one step further and trying to assign a dollar value to what those effects are. It's kind of a tricky thing, and we won't focus too much on assigning dollar values. I'll always just give you the dollar value equivalent, but I want you to be aware of what we're doing is we're assigning numbers to things that may not inherently be quantitative. And we call that monetizing the effects. We have to monetize every project effect and classify it as a benefit, a disbenefit, or a cost. So here's the definition for each of those three categories. The benefits are the things that provide advantages. It's why you're doing the project. So maybe it's going to save people's time or make a system more reliable or more safe or more environmentally friendly. All of those things are the motivations for doing a project, and you have to be able to say what they're worth on a dollar basis. The disbenefits are the consequences of a project that you'd rather avoid if you could. So, for example, while a project is being built, it may cause, temporarily at least, it may cause congestion on a freeway. And they're widening some of the lanes on Interstate 77. And in the long term, it's going to provide a higher capacity on that freeway. But in the short term, it inconveniences people. And you have to slow down through the construction zone, and there may be some accidents in the construction zone. And as they disturb the soil, there may be some temporary environmental damage. So all of these things have to be considered and monetized. We have to figure out a dollar value of the disbenefits. And then the costs are a little bit easier. We don't have to struggle in monetizing the costs because those are the actual expenditures and the expense for operation and ongoing maintenance of projects. And the two broad categories of our costs are the initial upfront construction costs of a project, and then secondarily the ongoing operational and maintenance costs. And so M and O stands for maintenance and operation. So once you've built a project like a park, you know, the upfront cost of purchasing the land and building the playground and putting in buildings and shelters, that's the initial cost. But then the annual maintenance and operation may be the grass cutting, paying for people to empty the garbage cans and all that sort of thing. So we're going to look at some equations, and it's really important that in the equations that we use, that use benefit, disbenefit, and cost, the money has to be in the same time. And so if the benefits come to the public over many, many years, what we want to do is we want to take all of those benefits to the present if we're going to be comparing those benefits to the costs, because the majority of the costs are at the present. The initial cost would be a lump sum at time 0. So if we're using B, D, and C in formulas, we will, when we use them in formulas, make sure that the amounts are in the same time frame. They're taken either to the present, the future, or on an annual basis. So that's one note. The next is that we already know that costs are outflows, and so you don't have to artificially put a minus sign in front of the costs. The effect of them being cost is already built into the structure of the formula that we're going to look at. And the last thing is that when the government does a project and it gives them a savings of some sort, you know, for example, if they now don't have as many ongoing costs as they have before, then we subtract that from the cost. And so we wouldn't consider savings as a benefit, we'd consider it as a reduction in the cost. So the formula that we're going to use, there's two. There's this conventional benefit to cost ratio. And so you can see that in the conventional ratio, what we say is we add up all the monetized benefits, put it in the numerator, and subtract the monetized disbenefits. And then in the denominator is the sum of the costs. And remember, the initial cost would be at time 0 in a given problem statement. But in a usual problem statement, the maintenance and operation would be an ongoing annual. So to add those two together, everything has to be at the same time. So the benefits which accrue over a long time period should be taken to the present. The disbenefits, take them to the present. Everything needs to be in the same time frame for us to do this equation. And the decision criteria is provided here on the side. It says, if the benefit to cost ratio is greater than or equal to 1, then you accept the project, otherwise you reject. Now think about why 1. What does that mean? What's so magical about B to C being greater than 1? What it means is that if it's greater than 1, it means you're getting $1 of benefit or more for every $1 of cost. So that's what this is a ratio of. This is a ratio of the dollar value of improvements compared to the dollar cost for implementation. So if your B to C ratio is 2, for example, that means you're getting $2 of benefit for every $1 of cost. And that's good. Thumbs up on a project like that. But if your ratio is less than 1, think about what that would imply. So if your B to C ratio is 0.7, then that means you're only getting 70 cents of benefit for every dollar of cost. So for example, it wouldn't be worthwhile to spend $50 million to build a reservoir so people can fish if there's only going to be $1 million worth of benefit for doing that. Now, you know, some politician may say, well, look at this reservoir, it's beautiful, people are going to enjoy fishing. And it's true, people will enjoy fishing, but the question is there going to be enough benefit to justify the cost? And so if it's 1 unit of benefit for 50 units of cost, then the project obviously is not justified. And if you go back through time, back to the early 1900s, the government wasn't so good at this. They would often do a lot of public works projects where the benefits did not outweigh the costs. And one kind of notorious example was flood control projects and dams that were built out in the western United States. There were a lot of dams that were built that weren't economically justified. I mean, there were benefits, but the benefits did not outweigh the cost in a lot of those projects. So this is the conventional B to C ratio. There's also a modified. In the case of the modified, you can see that we just simply move the maintenance and operation costs into the numerator. And the decision criteria is the same. The decision criteria is always going to be that you should look for more benefits than cost, and so that ratio should be greater than or equal to 1. One last formula that we're going to use in calculations like this is sometimes projects are undertaken in a partnership between a private partner and the municipality. And so a private partner, the group that's undertaking the project, if they are going to be operating the project on behalf of the public, then they're kind of insulated from the disbenefits. So you'll notice that here in the profitability index, the disbenefits are not included. Okay, so let's take a look at trying these equations and applying some of these ideas. If you have today's in-class exercise printed, hopefully you've got that out. If not, of course, here it is on the screen. We have the hypothetical here where a new highway is going to be built. And it's a highway with a study period of 20 years and a 4% discount rate. And if you've got this printed, the factor table's on the back side of the page. And let's look at the project characteristics. It's a $4 million cost at time 0. And then there is $18 million of construction costs in years 1 through 4. So that's talking about at the end of the first year, the end of the second, end of the third, and end of the fourth year. That's an expense each year. And then $4 million of expense at the end of year 5. So those are our construction costs. That's what we would call the C sub I, the initial costs. Now, they're not all at time 0, but they are the initial construction cost. We also have here the costs of maintenance and operation, and that's an annual series. Then you can see that there's a description of the revenue of benefits, and so we're just kind of combining together the monetized value of the benefits here. And it's $3 million a year in years 1 through 10, $5 million at the end of each year, years 11 through 20. And then there are some disbenefits that also have to be considered. So my suggestion initially is what you ought to do is just kind of sketch out a rough diagram to give you an idea of each one of these cost components. And then you can see A through G, I'm just stepping you through the process of determining all of the things you're going to need to calculate the B to C ratio. So find the present worth of the initial cost, the present worth of maintenance and operation, and so on and so forth. Find the present worth of all those so that then we can put it into the conventional and the modified benefit cost ratio. And then also we're going to look at the profitability index. Just if we exclude the effect of the disbenefits, then is it at least profitable from a firm that would be undertaking this on behalf of the public? All right, so it's 11:36. We got plenty of time to work on this one. We've got 14 minutes until class is over. I'll pause for a second, give you a chance to start crunching the numbers. This is good practice. It maybe has been a while since we did some of the table lookup calculations. So Please begin on this, and of course feel free to type your answers into the chat area and I'll tell you if you've got it right. Okay, I've got the solution for the first part A on the screen there. So let's just look at what we're doing to find the present worth of the initial costs. We've got 4 million that's already at the present, so it doesn't need any factor. And then there's 18 million a year for 4 years. So find present given an annual at 4% interest, n equals 4. We're multiplying that by 18 million. And then there is this 1 year of 4 million at year 5. So find the present based on a single future value, 4% interest in 5 years. And that's multiplied by 4 million. So it's 4 million already at the present. There's the 18 million per year that's multiplied by the factor 3.6299, because that's the lookup factor for 4 years, 4%. If we go to the P/A column, P/A, here it is, 4, so 3.6299 right there. All right. So in total, there's 4 million already at the present, 65 million that comes from that 18 million a year, and then the value of the 4 million in the future is 3.28. So in total, it should be, I think, $72.6 million is the initial cost. Okay, now for the next part, the maintenance and operation, we've got $1 million a year for 20 years. And so we need to find P given A, n equals 20. So P/A, here's our factor table, row 20, 13.5903. So the maintenance and operation cost, million multiplied by the 13.5903, so there's 13.59 million in maintenance and operation costs. Benefits, we are told that there are 3 million a year 1 through 10, and then 5 million a year for 11 through 20. So this first one is going to be pretty easy, the 3 million a year for 10 years. We just are going to find P given A for that 3 million a year, and our factor is going to be 4% table, n equals 10. But then the 5 million a year at years 11 through 20, if you think about what that is, that's an annual series that starts in year 11 and goes through year 20. So to get it to time 0, it's going to be a two-step process. It will be that we take all of the amount to year 10, and then from year 10 we take it to year 0. So this first factor, this one, is we're taking the annual series, 10 annual payment benefits. It's not necessarily payments, but it's benefits. So $5 million worth of benefits each year for 10 years. So it's in years 11 through 20, and with this factor it takes it to year 10, and then the P/F factor takes it from year 10 to year 0. So there should be $51 million worth of benefits, $51.73 million worth of benefits, and then the same approach with these disbenefits. We need to take it all to the present. So there were, see the disbenefits, it says $10 million during year 1, $5 million year 2, and $2 million during year 3. So those are each individual amounts, so we're going to find P given F. So the 10 million gets discounted 1 year, this 5 million gets discounted 2 years, and then the $2 million gets discounted 3 years. And then the total value of the disbenefits is $16.01 million. Okay, so the conventional B to C ratio doesn't look good for this project. If we substitute in all the values here, we've got 51.7 minus 16 in the numerator, so that's the benefits. In the costs, we've got a lot of costs down there in the denominator. $72 million for the initial costs, 13.6 for the maintenance and operation. So the conventional B to C ratio is less than 1, and that tells us the interpretation is this project should not be undertaken. This is an unacceptable project. For every dollar in costs, we're only getting 41 cents of benefit. Well, what if we look at it the other way? What if we look at it according to the modified B to C ratio formula? Will it be a yes there? It'll never contradict. You'll never get a no from one ratio and a yes from the other. It's just that the numbers will be slightly different. The B to C ratio is even worse because we're subtracting out the maintenance and operation costs from the benefits that are in the numerator. So from that perspective, we're only getting 30 cents of benefit for every dollar in initial costs. And the profitability index is similarly less than 1. So this project is a stinker. No matter what way you look at it, we would give a thumbs down to that project. Alright, so we're going to do more of this. It's important that you get some practice with it, so I would encourage you to take an early look at the homework assignment. It's available now. What we will be doing, just to give you an idea of where things are headed, is today we did B to C analysis. On Wednesday we're going to do incremental B to C analysis. And so you remember we've done an incremental analysis when we were analyzing with rate of return. We're going to take that same idea of comparing two alternatives and the extra money that the more expensive alternative takes, and we're going to be analyzing the increment. So that's just a preview of Wednesday's class. Now, before then, if you get an early start on the homework, that would be great. And of course, there's also the project hanging over you, so you've got plenty to keep you busy. That's it for today. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a call on Teams or send me an email, and I will talk to you on Wednesday. Take care.